Are you kidding me with this Ocasio-Cortez nonsense? This congresswoman has really gone way too far this time with her outrageous comments, saying there's a risk in not seizing Trump's assets before he's even been convicted of anything. That's an astounding overreach of government power. This socialist lady clearly doesn't have a firm grasp on how the legal system works or what the actual facts are regarding Trump's case. Yet she recklessly spouts off this controversial stance like it's the gospel truth. It's maddening just how misinformed and radical her statements are. Let me explain this in simple terms that even Ocasio-Cortez might be able to understand. You absolutely cannot just arbitrarily seize an American citizen's assets without any due process being followed. There are constitutional protections and legal procedures that must be adhered to before taking such draconian action against someone's private property. But I wouldn't expect an extreme far-left ideologue like AOC to care much about upholding constitutional rights when they get in the way of her political agenda. She is basically advocating for the government to trample all over long-established principles of due process, presumption of innocence, and private property rights in order to confiscate the lawful belongings and assets of citizens like Trump before any wrongdoing has even been proven in court. That's an incredibly slippery slope that undermines core American principles of freedom, justice, and the rule of law that our nation was founded upon. Of course, upholding and preserving fundamental American values like these doesn't seem to be much of a priority for Ocasio-Cortez and her cabal of radical progressive comrades. The authoritarian left only cares about accumulating as much power as possible for themselves, so they can force their fringe agenda onto the rest of the country by any means necessary, including dismantling civic rights and tenets if required. Just look at Ocasio-Cortez's outrageous declaration that there is supposedly a risk if Trump is allowed to temporarily maintain access to his own lawfully acquired finances and assets while he mounts a legal defense against the dubious charges he faces. That's an absolutely extreme stance that prioritizes punitive action against political opposition over preserving the most basic constitutional protections afforded to every American citizen. What exactly is this ominous risk that has AOC and her unhinged leftist cronies so panicked? That Trump might use some of his own legally obtained money and resources to, actually pay his lawyers and defend himself in court against the brazenly political charges leveled against him. Apparently, being able to fund one's own legal defense is now considered an outrageous risk to democracy by these undemocratic radicals. In the warped, radical viewpoint of authoritarian anti-Americans like Ocasio-Cortez, the mere thought of Trump being able to utilize his own lawfully acquired assets and wealth to legally protect himself from the onslaught of partisan prosecutions is apparently a terrifying prospect to be stamped out and punished at all costs, regardless of whether it violates his constitutional rights in the process. How shockingly un-American and Orwellian to so vocally oppose a citizen having lawful access to their own finances and property for the purpose of their legal protection. This reckless stance being pushed by AOC is essentially arguing that the government should be able to unilaterally loot all of Trump's personal belongings, business properties, assets, and bank accounts based solely on unproven allegations, without any due process or respect for his constitutional rights. Using some vague imagined premonition of risks as a flimsy justification for depriving him of his rightful property and wealth before he's been convicted of any actual crimes is an extremely dangerous precedent that strikes at the heart of America's founding ideals. While temporarily maintaining lawful access to one's own legally obtained assets is not only a constitutional right, but an absolute necessity for any American citizen, while they navigate complex legal proceedings, AOC and her kind view this basic freedom as some criminal risk to be eradicated. That incredibly warped perspective reveals the underlying disdain for civil liberties and due process that burns in the authoritarian hearts of these far-left extremists. They would gladly hand-wave away sacrosanct human rights and constitutional protections if it allowed them to selfishly consolidate more power and punish any dissenting political voices. While the patriotic, liberty-minded American majority strives to preserve and strengthen precious liberties like due process, freedom of speech, private property rights, and equal justice under the law for all citizens. Radicals like Ocasio-Cortez are instead openly advocating for and cheering on oppressive Orwellian policies that run diametrically opposed to these ideals, all wrapped in the Orwellian guise of pursuing some twisted far-left vision of justice that bears no resemblance whatsoever to actual justice as the founders conceived it. But while twisted voices like Ocasio-Cortez's may be loud and incessant, regurgitating authoritarian propaganda and falsehoods at every opportunity, the silent American majority stands united to defend the rights, freedoms, and constitutional governance that has allowed our nation to become the greatest country on God's earth. We will never surrender our precious liberties and self-determination to the whims of anti-democratic socialists and neo-Marxist revolutionaries whose ultimate objective is stamping out what makes America a shining city on a hill in the first place.